Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Learning Kitchen Live. My name is Beth Kitzis, and I'm one of the dietitians here at Community Servings. I'm really excited today because I'm going to be talking about healthy fats. So for those of you who were adults or even teenagers back in the 80s and 90s, everything was about fat-free, you know, and that if it was fat-free, it was healthy. And now research shows us that we actually really do need dietary fat, and that fat isn't what makes people actually become heavier or gain weight. And in fact, fats are really important to our diet. But the issue is that not all fats are created equal. So today I'm going to be talking about what are the healthy fats and what are the less healthy fats. And I'm going to be making some recipes using these healthy fats. So I'm going to be making some muffins, kind of a traditional blueberry muffin, except I'm going to be replacing the fat source in the muffin with avocado. And then I'm going to be making sort of a mock chorizo, and I'm going to be using walnuts, which are another source of healthy fats. So we'll start out with the muffins, and then while they're baking, we'll talk a little more, and we'll work on our chorizo. So I'm going to come over here to start my muffins. So pretty much everything in this muffin batter is the same as what you would normally do. I'm using whole wheat flour because we want to keep the fiber high and use whole grains as much as possible. I'm using some sugar, so you know, it's not a completely healthy meal. We are using some sugar, but you could definitely cut back on the sugar in these muffins if you're looking to do that. And an egg, and you know, some cinnamon, and you know, leaveners. But instead of using butter or oil, we're going to use an avocado. And the reason for that is that avocados are a really good source of healthy fats. So I'm going to start getting that ready, and then we will, while I do that, I'll talk a little bit about which fats we want to avoid, and then I'll move on to which fats we really want to try to get into our diet. So I'm just going to cut the avocado, and I have my oven preheating at 350 or 375, and then to get that pit out, you just kind of let your knife fall into it and pull it out like that, and then just pull it off the knife. So this avocado is pretty good, nice and ripe, so I'm gonna just be able to squeeze it into a bowl. And then we'll get the other half. And then now that I'm done with this cutting board, I'm gonna just move it out of my way so that it's not in my way anymore. Okay, so in a normal or traditional muffin batter, you might start with some oil, or you might start with some butter, and you cream it to get it nice and soft. So what I'm going to do is just take like a potato masher. You could even do this with an electric mixer, and just get it nice and mashed up. So sometimes when you're making guacamole, you might like that to be kind of chunky. We do not want chunky here. We want it to be as smooth as possible. So it doesn't have to be 100% smooth, but just as smooth as you can possibly get. You can also do this with a fork, but you will probably end up with some extra chunks if you do that. Okay, and then I'm gonna add some sugar. Oh, we already have a question.
Are there alternatives to sugar for sweetening this recipe?
So I haven't tried this recipe with an alternative sweetener. You could use maple syrup or honey. The truth of the matter is, though, maple syrup and honey are still sugar, so you're not really you know, eliminating sugar if you're using one of the more natural or less refined sugars. I think the best bet would just be to cut back. So honey tends to be a little sweeter than traditional refined sugar, so you might be able to use less. I'm using 3/4 of a cup. For sure, you could cut back to a 1/2 cup in this recipe, and they would still be good. So I'm going to add the sugar and just mix it up like as if I was mixing butter. And you're going to see the sugar is going to start to sort of combine with the avocado, and it's going to completely change its texture. So get that together. So the rest of the wet ingredients in here are going to be 1 egg. And eggs are another thing that people sort of were avoiding a lot in the 90s because they have some dietary cholesterol in them. But actually the main fat sources in eggs are often full of omega-3s, which I'm going to talk a little bit about later. And so actually, unless you have been told by a doctor to avoid too many eggs, eggs are actually a really good source of healthy fats and lots of other nutrients too. All right, so we'll set this aside and I'm going to do my dry ingredients. Okay, so I've got 2 cups of whole wheat flour here, and I'm just going to put it in the bowl. And then to that, I'm going to add 2 teaspoons of baking powder, and then half a teaspoon of baking soda. And then half a teaspoon of salt as well. And we'll just whisk those together. And we're going to add a little bit of cinnamon. You can leave it out if you don't like it, but it just adds like a little nice flavor to it. So about a teaspoon of cinnamon. You could also add some nutmeg or ginger even, whatever warm spices you like. Just get that in there. So those are my dry ingredients. So I'm gonna add one more thing to the, or actually 2 more things to the sugar mixture with the avocado. I'm gonna add some Greek yogurt, and that's gonna add some more moisture, a little bit of protein. So this is just plain Greek yogurt. You could use full fat, non-fat, anything will work in this recipe. And a touch of vanilla extract. I like to just use the cap to measure my vanilla. Why dirty something else? As you know, I don't like dishes. Okay. And then, because we're using whole wheat flour, sometimes things get a little dry. So I'm also going to be using a 1/4 cup of water, just to thin out the batter a little bit, make sure that my muffins don't come out dry. So I'm just going to grab some water. Everywhere. All right, so you'll notice we are definitely dealing with a nice green hue. So there's no fooling anyone that there's a mystery ingredient in this. I did that at home, and certainly they were delicious, but nobody missed the fact that they were slightly green. So now I'm just going to gently fold my dry ingredients into my wet. And when you're making a muffin, you want to be as gentle as possible, because the more you mix, the tougher the muffins are going to get. So I just want to mix until I don't see any more flour. You can see this batter is going to be really thick. And because I'm using whole wheat flour, it does actually mask the green a little bit more. If you make it with white flour, you're definitely going to notice. Alright, and then finally I'm going to add some blueberries. So I'm using fresh blueberries here, but you can use frozen. When I made them at home, I did it with frozen blueberries, and it worked just as fine. You don't even need to thaw them. So I'm going to use most of this container. You need about 1.5 cups, so probably this most of this container. Save a few for snacking later. Okay, so what are the unhealthy fats that I referred to earlier today? So there's really 3 types of dietary fats that we have in our diet. We have saturated fats, unsaturated fats, and then we have trans fats. So the fats that we want to avoid as much as possible but can still enjoy in our diet are the saturated fats, and those are the fats that we usually find in animal products, so things like butter and meat and anything that's really solid. Ooh, I just realized I forgot. Did I do the salt? I did do the salt, sorry. You do not want a baked good without salt. So butter and pretty much anything that's solid at room temperature. So there are some plant sources of saturated fat. Coconut oil is usually the main one because that is also solid at room temperature. And Saturated fats are more problematic because they tend to make our cholesterol go up more, or more specifically our LDL cholesterol, which is the cholesterol that we want to keep lower. They make that type of our cholesterol go up. Wow, I've just run out of muffin cups. So we're gonna just spoon these in. So like I said, sources of saturated fat would be things like butter, meat, especially meats that are more fatty cut. And we just want to keep those fats to about less than 10% of our daily calories. So they don't need to be avoided at all costs, but they're just something we want to eat less of. So a lot of times, if we're making something and we can replace a saturated fat source, for example, butter in this recipe with avocado, it's going to make it a little healthier, a little bit more heart healthy, and just better for our bodies. The other kind of fat that we really want to avoid at all costs are trans fats, and that's because those are chemically made. So if you've ever read a food label and you see the words partially hydrogenated or hydrogenated oils, those are trans fats. And basically what they're doing is they're taking a liquid fat and they're turning it into a solid fat. And so why would a food company want to do this? Well, it's a really cheap way to get the texture and shelf life for a baked good or other goods without having to use a more expensive product. So they use trans fats to kind of get the texture and shelf life without having to spend the extra money on things that might cost them more. The problem with trans fats is that not only do they raise your bad cholesterol, your LDL, but a lot of times they lower your good cholesterol, which is your HDL. So you're kind of getting it at both sides, and they're just, you know, doing exactly the opposite of what you want to happen. I'm going to use some muffin spray to get the rest of these muffins in the oven. The other thing about trans fats is that generally the foods that have trans fats in them, if you think about like cookies and pastries or like refrigerated biscuits and things like that, they're not generally the healthiest foods anyway. But also a lot of companies are kind of moving away from using them now because the public is starting to become aware that those are not the healthiest foods. There is one thing to be aware of though. Sometimes a food will say it doesn't contain any trans fats when it has less than a half of a milligram of it. So you need to check to make sure that the ingredients doesn't have something called hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated oils, because if it does, it means it does have trans fats. It's just that per serving you have less than half a gram, but if you eat 3 servings of that food, then you probably have more than a gram. So who hasn't ever sat and eaten more than 1 serving of Oreos? Okay, so I'm just gonna get my hands cleaned off and we're gonna get these in the oven, and then we're gonna talk about the fats we do want to eat. So I'm just gonna pop these in the oven. They'll probably take about 15 minutes here. At home, they probably take about 20 to 25. Okay. I'm just going to get some of this stuff out of the way, because we're still going to need our food processor today. Okay, so what are the fats we do want to eat? We want to look for unsaturated fats, and there's a couple of different types of unsaturated fats, but all of the unsaturated fats are healthy for us. So the 2 main types are monounsaturated and polyunsaturated, and they do have different properties. Some of them are more neuroprotective, some of them are better at raising your HDL, which we do want people to have higher levels of HDLs. But they're all really good sources of fat, and don't make people's LDL go up. So the fat source I'm using today is going to be walnuts, and walnuts are a really good source of omega-3 fats, which are another source of fat that we really need in our diet. It's an essential fat, meaning we can't make it ourselves, so you have to eat it. And there's a couple different forms of omega-3s. We have the vegetable sources, and then we have the fish sources, and they're a little bit different, so I'll talk about that a little. So what I'm going to be doing is making like a mock chorizo here that we're going to get fried up, and then you could use this if you were making like tacos or burritos or some form of like a Mexican meal. You could even put it on a salad. So what I'm going to do is take a can of no salt added black beans, which is also going to add some nice protein and fiber to this dish. So as far as healthy fats, we want to aim for about 20 to 35% of our calories coming from healthy fats. So what are some good sources of these healthy fats that I'm talking about, these unsaturated fats? So they're things like nuts, seeds, the legumes have a little bit of healthy fats, whole grains, things like chia seeds, and then of course the healthy oils, so olive oil and nut oils, things like that. So I'm going to get these in there. And we're going to take these, this is going to come together really quickly. We're just going to take our black beans and our walnuts, and we're going to get them in the food processor. Oh, we have another question.
Can you show how much you filled the muffin containers?
Oh, I actually filled them so they were kind of over a little bit. That muffin batter is really thick, so it can kind of hold up on its own. A lot of times, like a wetter batter, you would fill less, but those I actually filled like all the way to the top. So I used all the batter and just divided it among the 12 cups. All right, so we're gonna get these in there. And then this is 2 cups of walnuts. It doesn't matter if they're whole or already chopped because we're just gonna chop them up anyway. And these are just the main 2 ingredients. The only other things we're going to add to this are a little bit of olive oil and some vinegar and then some spices. I'm just going to give it a quick whirl. And then we're going to add the rest of the ingredients. Actually, I'm going to give it one more sec. Okay. So to this, I'm going to add some spices. So I've got some traditional Mexican spices. So I've got some cumin, I have oregano, I have some chili powder, and I have some smoked paprika, which will give it sort of that smoky, meaty taste that we're looking for. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of white vinegar and a couple of teaspoons of olive oil. So we'll get those in there. Sorry, I keep jumping back and forth. So we're going to do 2 tablespoons of olive oil. And then a tablespoon of white vinegar just to give it some like zing and a little acidity. Add our spices. So we've got some cumin and some chili powder. You could also add some chipotle or even like a whole chipotle pepper. That would give it a really nice smoky, spicy taste. I'm going to add some salt, about a teaspoon of salt. And then our paprika and some oregano. So a teaspoon of oregano and a tablespoon of smoked paprika. And smoked paprika is a really great way to get your meatless foods kind of having that smoky, bacony flavor. So I like to use it a lot in meatless dishes, especially when I'm trying to get you know, that nice smoky flavor. So we'll get this going. I just need to give it a little stir. And while I do that, I'm also going to get my pan going. So I'm just going to get a pan going, use a non-stick skillet, and I'm going to get it going on the stove. And I'm just going to give this a little stir to make sure everything is nice and even. So you don't want to end up with a total paste. So you want things to be pretty cohesive, but not like baby food paste. So probably just a couple more seconds. So you can see it's pretty chunky still. Maybe the consistency of ground beef, not quite. Probably wouldn't fool anyone into thinking this is ground beef, but you might at least convert some people into thinking that it's just as good. Okay, so we're just gonna add a little bit more olive oil to the pan so it doesn't stick too much. Okay, so I referenced omega-3 fats when I was leading this up. So what's so special about omega-3s? We hear about this all the time. Get your omega-3s. You know, what's so great about them? And what is so great about them is that they are really helpful in preventing heart disease. So the best sources of omega-3s are going to be fatty fishes. So things like salmon, tuna, anchovies, fish that are kind of oily. And what research has shown is that people who get more of the omega-3s that come from those marine animals, so those polyunsaturated fats, are less likely to have heart disease and are less likely to die of heart attacks. There's also a lot of supplements out there, and the research on people taking omega-3 supplements is a little less clear. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. So certainly it's worth thinking about, especially if you're someone that doesn't prefer fish or just can't get enough fish into your diet, to talk to your physician about whether or not it would be worth taking an omega-3 supplement. The other types of omega-3s, which are referred to as ALA or alpha-linolenic acid, are the ones that come from vegetable sources, so like the walnuts or chia and flax seeds and things like that. And they're also really healthy as well, and we do need them in our diet. They're just not possibly quite as heart protective as the marine ones. So it is really good, if you can, to try to get some fatty fish in your diet like once or twice a week. Alright, so we're going to get that going, and you can kind of see it does resemble a little bit of ground beef, and you just want to get it browning up. My pan's a little hot, so I'm going to turn it down. So what I'm going to do with this is put it in a tortilla with some pickled onions and tomatoes. You can use whatever toppings you like. And while this is just getting nice and good and brown, I'm going to take a peek at my muffins. So you can see they've risen really nice and high. And the way you usually know muffins are done is by sticking a toothpick in them. They probably need about 2 more minutes. So I don't know if you can see, but it is really starting to brown up nicely like a ground beef, and you just want to get it starting to brown on all sides and not be so mushy like it started out with. I just realized I don't have a plate to serve. That's perfect. Thank you. Valerie is saving me today. So you can see how quickly this came together. If you came home after work one day and we're looking to, you know, get your Mexican fix, and you just had some nuts and some beans and whatever spices you have in your counter, you could probably whip this up in just a couple minutes. and have a nice meatless taco night. So topped with avocado, which is also filled with healthy unsaturated fats and fiber, you would have a really healthy meal in your hands. Alright, so that probably will do it. It really just needs a few minutes, maybe like 3 to 5 minutes. Alright, so while that's just finishing up, I'm going to get it plated and then we'll pull the muffins. So I just have some whole wheat tortillas here. I prefer my tortillas heated up, so usually I either microwave them or put them in some foil in the oven, but for time's sake today, we'll just do it like this, and then you would just put some meat in here. And you could top this with any veggies you like, hot sauce. I'm a big hot sauce fan. And then I did some chopped tomatoes, fresh from one of the farms local to here. And I also made some just quick pickled onions. So I just took a chopped onion and threw some salt and a pinch of sugar and some white vinegar and got that going. And it really adds like a nice acidic crunch to any Mexican meal. So do that. And there you have it, a beautiful, meat-free, full of healthy fats taco. So I'm going to pull the muffins. Yeah, so these look gorgeous, big, high-rising, bakery-style muffins. A bit too hot to handle. So you just want to let these cool for about 5 minutes until you can handle them. And then just let them continue to cool on a rack or just on your counter. And these muffins can freeze. You just put them in an airtight container and keep them, for a few weeks at a time. The chorizo you can also make ahead of time. So I could make it today for tomorrow's dinner or use it as a leftovers all week. So I hope you learned some really interesting facts about healthy fats. If there are any questions, let me know. I will drop the recipes in there as well. And yeah, I hope you'll try these out and get some nice healthy fats in your diet.